There's a specific kind of frustration that shows up when you're trying to change something about yourself. You know what needs to happen. You've set the goal. You've made the commitment. You've decided with full clarity that this time is different. This time you're going to follow through. And for a few days, maybe a week, you do. You force yourself to show up. You override your resistance. You push past the discomfort. You white-knuckle your way through. And then something happens. You miss a day. You make an exception. You tell yourself it's just this once. And before you know it, the whole thing has collapsed. You're back where you started, except now you're also carrying the weight of another failed attempt. And the question that follows is always the same. Why do I keep sabotaging myself? Why can't I just do the thing? And the answer you're usually given is, you're not trying hard enough. You need more discipline, more willpower, more commitment. But here's what I want you to consider. The problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough. The problem is that you're forcing it. This video is about why forcing change creates resistance. It's about what happens inside your system when you're trying to override it instead of working with it. About why pressure doesn't create transformation, it delays it. And about why your resistance isn't the enemy you think it is. This won't tell you to relax and wait for change to happen on its own. It won't tell you that effort doesn't matter. But it will help you to see why the way you've been approaching change with force, with pressure, with urgency, is the very thing creating the resistance you're trying to overcome. Let's start with something most people don't realize. When you force change, you create internal conflict, not alignment. What does that mean? It means you have two systems inside you, one that wants change and the one that doesn't trust it yet. The part that wants the change, that's your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, the part that can see the benefits, understand the logic, set the goal. It's the part that says, this is good for me, this is what I should do. But there's another part, the part that's been keeping you safe, the part that's built on patterns and habits and survival strategies that have worked for years. And when you suddenly decide to change those patterns, when you force a new behavior without addressing what the old behavior was protecting, that part resists. Not because it's trying to sabotage you, because it's trying to keep you safe. And when you force the change, when you override that resistance with willpower, with discipline, with sheer determination, you're not resolving the conflict. You're just suppressing one side of it. And suppression doesn't last. Because the part of you that's resisting, it doesn't go away. It just waits. And the moment your willpower depletes, the moment you're stressed or tired or overwhelmed, it comes back, stronger than before. Because your system interprets the force as threat. And threat activates protection. And protection looks like resistance. So you end up in a war with yourself, one part pushing, one part pulling back. And no one wins that war. You just exhaust yourself. This is why forcing behavior triggers internal backlash. Because force doesn't create safety. It creates pressure. And pressure activates your nervous system's defense mechanisms. Now, let's talk about what happens neurologically when you try to force change. Your nervous system has one primary job, keep you alive. And it does that by monitoring for threat, by assessing what's safe and what's not. And when something feels unfamiliar, even if it's objectively better for you, your system flags it as uncertain. And uncertain equals potential danger. So, when you decide to change a habit, to set a boundary, to do something differently, your system doesn't automatically celebrate. It doesn't say, oh good, an upgrade. It says, wait, this is new. I don't know how safe this is. And if you force the change, if you push through without giving your system time to adjust, without proving to it that the new behavior is safe, it will resist. It will create friction. It will make the new behavior feel harder than it needs to be. Not because you're broken, because your system is doing its job. It's protecting you from the unknown. And here's the critical part. You can't logic your way past that protection. You can't convince your nervous system that the change is safe. You have to show it through repetition, through consistency, through creating conditions where the new behavior doesn't activate threat. But when you force it, when you approach change with urgency, with pressure, with the energy of, I have to fix this now, you're adding stress to an already uncertain situation. You're making the change feel like an emergency, and emergencies don't feel safe. So your system resists harder, not because it doesn't want you to change, because you're asking it to trust something unfamiliar while simultaneously signaling that there's a threat. And that's a contradiction your nervous system can't resolve. So it defaults to what it knows, to the old pattern, to the familiar behavior, even if that behavior isn't serving you anymore. Here's the third thing. Safety creates consistency in a way that force never can. When you force change, you're relying on external pressure, on deadlines, on accountability, on the fear of failure, on willpower. And external pressure can work for a while. It can get you moving. It can create short-term results. But it's not sustainable. Because pressure is exhausting. It requires constant effort, constant vigilance, constant override of your system's natural responses. And eventually, you run out of capacity. You can't maintain that level of force indefinitely. And when the pressure drops, when you're tired, when life gets hard, when you don't have the energy to keep pushing, the change collapses. But safety? Safety creates a different kind of consistency. When your system feels safe, change doesn't require force. It doesn't require override. It happens naturally because your nervous system isn't resisting it anymore. It's not flagging the new behavior as a threat. It's recognizing it as familiar, as trustworthy, as safe. And when that happens, the behavior becomes easier. Not because you suddenly have more willpower, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. Force creates compliance. You do the thing because you're making yourself. Safety creates consistency. You do the thing because it feels aligned. And alignment doesn't collapse the moment pressure disappears. Because it's not built on pressure. It's built on trust. On your system believing that the new pattern is safe. But you can't create that trust through force. You create it through patience, through repetition, through proving to your system slowly and consistently that the new behavior doesn't threaten your survival. Here's the fourth thing, and it's the part that changes everything. Your resistance isn't the enemy. Most people treat resistance like it's the obstacle, like it's the thing standing between them and the change they want. Like if they could just overcome it, push past it, defeat it, then transformation would happen. But resistance isn't the enemy. Resistance is information. It's your system telling you something. Usually, it's telling you one of two things. Either change doesn't feel safe yet, or the change doesn't align with something deeper in your identity. And when you force past that resistance, when you ignore it, override it, treat it like it's irrational, you miss the message. You miss the opportunity to understand what's actually blocking the change. Because most resistance isn't random, it's protective. It's there for a reason. And if you don't address that reason, if you just try to power through, the resistance will keep showing up in different forms, in different ways, but it will keep showing up until you listen to it. And listening doesn't mean giving in. It doesn't mean abandoning the change. It means slowing down enough to understand what the resistance is protecting, what it's afraid of, what it needs to feel safe enough to let go. And when you do that, when you approach resistance with curiosity instead of force, you stop creating internal conflict. You stop fighting yourself, and you start creating the conditions where change can actually happen, not through pressure, through alignment. So let's bring this together. If you've been forcing change, if you've been pushing yourself, overriding your resistance, trying to discipline your way into transformation, and it keeps collapsing, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack willpower. It's because force creates the very resistance you're trying to overcome. Your system isn't sabotaging you. It's protecting you. And when you treat that protection like an enemy, when you try to override it instead of working with it, you create a wall inside yourself. And no one wins that war. And you might be feeling something right now. Maybe relief, maybe frustration, maybe confusion about what you're supposed to do if forcing doesn't work. That's okay. That's valid. Because this isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing differently. It's about approaching change with curiosity instead of urgency, with patience instead of pressure, with alignment instead of force. And that looks different than what you've been taught. It's slower, it's subtler, it's less dramatic. But it's also the only thing that lasts. Because when you create the conditions for safety, when you prove to your system that the new behavior isn't a threat, resistance dissolves. Not because you defeated it, because it no longer has a reason to exist. And that's when change becomes sustainable. Not because you're forcing it, because your system has learned to trust it. This is why sustainable change always looks calmer than expected. Because it's not built on pressure. It's not built on force. It's built on alignment, on safety, on your nervous system recognizing the new pattern as familiar instead of threatening. And you can't rush that. You can't force it. You can only create the conditions for it. You don't need to push harder. You don't need more discipline. You don't need to overcome your resistance. You don't need to force yourself into a version of change that feels like constant battle. You need to slow down. You need to listen. You need to understand what your resistance is protecting and create conditions where that protection is no longer necessary. Force creates compliance, but compliance collapses. Safety creates consistency, and consistency is what lasts. So if you've been at war with yourself, if you've been trying to force change and wondering why it keeps failing, you're not broken. You're just using the wrong approach. Your resistance isn't the enemy. It's the messenger. And when you stop fighting it and start listening to it, that's when transformation becomes possible.